Hey guys, today we are listening to one of the great short story from the book of 100 World's Greatest Short Stories. The title name was The Fable of the Preacher Who Flew His Kite, but not because he wished to do so. The story was written by George Ed and narrated by Niharika. A certain preacher became wise to the fact that he was not making a hit with his congregation. The parishioner did not seem inclined to seek him out after services and tell him he was a pansy. He suspected that they were rapping him on the quiet. The preacher knew there must be something wrong with his talk. He had been trying to expound in a clear and straightforward manner, omitting foreign quotations, setting up for illustration of his points such historical chapters, characters as were familiar to his hearers, putting the sturdy old English words ahead of the time, and rather flying low along the intellectual plane of the articulation that chipped into play his salary. But the few who followed were not tickled. They could understand everything he said, and they began to think he was common. So he studied the situation and decided that if he wanted to win them and make everybody believe he was a nobby and was Mr. he would have to hand out a little quilt. He fixed it up good and penny. On the following Sunday morning, he got up in the lookout and read a text that did not mean anything. Read from either directions. And then he sized up his flock with a dreamy eyes and said, "We cannot more adequately voice the poetry and mystique of our text than is those familiar lines of the great Icelandic poet icon Navrojik. To hold is not to have. Under the seared firmament, where chaos sweeps and vast purity, sinners at these burning aspirations. There is the full repression. When the preacher concluded this extract from the well-known Icelandic poet, he paused and looked downwards, breathing heavily through his nose, like Camille and the third act. A stout woman in the front row put on her eyeglasses and leaned forward so as not to miss anything. A venerable harness dealer over at the fright nodded his head. Suddenly he seemed to recognize the quotations. Members of the congregation glanced at one another as if to say, "This is certainly hot stuff." The preacher wiped his brow and said he had no doubt that everyone within the sound of his voice remembered what Quarles had said. Following the same line of thought, it was Quarles who disputed the contention of the great prison theologian Ramtus that the soul that the soul in its reaching out after the unavailable was guided by the spiritual genius of motive rather than by mere impulse of mentality. The preacher did not know what all this meant, and he did not care. But you can rest easily that the pew holder were on in a minute. He talked it off in just the way that Kranos talks when he gets Roxanne so dizzy that she nearly falls off the pizza. The parishioners bite their lower lips and hungered for more first-class language. They had paid their money for talk and were prepared to solve any all styles of disability. They held on to the concessions of seemed to be having a nice time. The preacher quoted copiously from the great poet Ambios. He recited 18 lines of Greek and then said, "How true this is!" And not persona battered an eye. It was Ambius whose amortens lines he recited in order to prove the extreme error of the position assumed in the contemporary by the famous Italian poet. He had them going, and there was not a thing to do it. Then he would get tired of talking philosophy. He would quote from a celebrated poet of Ecuador or Tasmania or some other speaker of as the Icelandic masterpiece, the most obscure or clouded possession in Robert Browning was like a plate glass front in a street candy store just after the colored boy gets through using the camouflage. After that, he began to get rid of long Boston words that had not been used before that season. He grabbed a rhetorical Roman candle in each hand and you couldn't see him for the sparks, after which he snapped his voice to a whisper and talked about the boats and the flowers. When although there was no clue for his to weep, he shed a few real tears, and there wasn't a dry glow in the church. After he sat down, he could tell by the scared look of the people in front that he had made a testicle. Did they give him the joyous plum that day? Sure. The stout lady, he could not control her feelings when she told how much the sermon had helped her. The venerable Harkness Dallas said that he wished to endorse the able and scattery Christian of Politan. In fact, everyone said the sermon was super fine and Denny. The only thing that worried the congregations was the fear that if it wished to retain such a wealth, it might have to boost his salary. In a meantime, the preacher waited for someone to come and ask about politics. Ambitious, Ramtazak, Quartierless, and the great Icelandic poet Navrojic, but no one had the face to step up and confuse his ignorance of his celebrities. The few holders did not even admit among themselves that preacher had rungs in some new ones. They stood pat and merely said it was an elegant sermon, perceiving that they would stand for anything. The preacher knew what to do after that. The moral of the story is give the people what they think they want.